Yo.
Yo, what's going on?
You ain't been to the barber in a minute, huh?
Yeah, it's been a minute. Yeah, it's been a while. It's been a long, longer than a
Yeah.
minute.
Yeah.
Yeah, I need to find a barber quickly. I need to find Fred.
Yeah. Yeah, he'll need to hook you up for sure.
Yeah. I haven't. I talked to him. I guess about a month ago, 4 or 5 weeks ago,
Yeah.
and yeah, we were just talking about when things would get, back to normal, if anything. And so, yeah. So I think the shop is back open now.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. It's about time, man. It's about time.
yeah.
Hey.
I'm trying to get to you. I'm trying to get to Dre.
Yeah, no. One of a kind look right there.
Right.
Yeah. Hey, I see a lot of you guys joining in. Hey, welcome. Blessed that you're going to be hanging out with us tonight and just talking about, the issues that we're all passionate about and kind of on everyone's mind. I have been thinking and praying a lot last week and this week, and like so many, like my heart was heavy. But I didn't really know what to do with it. And so I'm kind of like sorting through all those things. And, a lot of people have been posting things. A lot of people have been saying things. So I almost felt like, and Merritt, I don't know if you agree or not, I almost felt like, man, do I even need to add a voice into this? But then as I did sit back and pray, I really felt like the Holy Spirit was giving me that nudge, to speak and to share my thoughts. And I had a lot of different friends, and you probably had the same, a lot of different friends contacting you and asking questions. And so I wanted to be able to speak into this issue, lend my energy, my voice. I have a very small platform, but I want to use that for the glory of God whenever possible. And I think that my real heart in doing this, or maybe like the central focus, that's even why I wanted to do an Instagram Live, like it's for my generation. Like I want to talk to the 20s and 30s, the 40-year-old people that are out there. And, millennials get a bad rap. It's usually negative press, but for my millennial brothers and sisters, like, man, I love you. And the thing that was on my heart is like, we are the future leaders of the next generation, kind of coming into our prime. And I want to help us do better. It's my heart to do better. I'm sure it's your heart to do better. And the other thing is I'm really hopeful for this generation. I really feel, and this is my heart of heart feelings, I feel like our generation has a greater sense of unity and love and diversity for sure. So when I hear other people talking, the common thread is, okay, well, how do we do better at this? Like, how do we move forward? So I want to be able to speak into that. And guys that are joining, I've asked my friend Merritt to come along with me on this journey for today and tomorrow. I've got a few other friends who are going to be joining me. For those of you guys who don't know Merritt, Pastor Merrit Robinson, Merritt, we first met when I was in junior high, right?
Junior high. It's been a long time. I remember when you were a little kid, clean cut, no beard, no braids. Yeah, but no, it's been a while. Yeah.
Yeah. Merritt has been, he's been my youth pastor. He's been my mentor. He's that guy that's always been there. He's the guy that, like, when I was messing up, my mom would call and be like, Merritt, you need to come deal with this boy. Oh, so we have had plenty of long talks. I don't think that I paid attention most of the time, but man, your love for me, your care for me, it really grew a trust. And so I was really excited about talking about this issue with you because, some of these things are sensitive and people aren't always comfortable talking about them. But I've never felt judgment from you. We've always had really open dialogues. And so I appreciate that about you for sure. Merritt, Graduated. So you went to Rice University first, right?
Went to Rice University. I went on a football scholarship, but I was a football baseball player. So I played 2 sports while I was there.
All right, Bo Jackson.
Yeah, I wish. No, but lettered 3 years in both sports. Came back from Rice, which is down in Houston, Texas. Came back here to California, where I'm originally from, and started working. Once I returned back here, got involved in church, and then that's where I met Marlon. Met Marlon at the Calvary Chapel Golden Springs back in, it would have been like 96, 97, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
And then, but we've been friends ever since. I'm currently a dean at California Baptist University. Pastor a home church called Infinite Christian Fellowship.
Yeah.
And so...
Graduate of Fuller Theological Seminary.
Graduated from Fuller with a master's in theology, emphasis in biblical studies back in 2010.
Awesome. Guys, you're really going to appreciate Merrit. Like I said before, I have my entire life, so glad to be able to talk about this with him. So let's jump right into it, Merrit. I mean, we've all seen what's been going on in the news, from the Ahmaud Arbery to George Floyd, seen everything that's been on Facebook and Instagram. And so it's the topic that everyone's talking about, right? And so my first question, and really kind of where I want to go with things today, is I want to talk about the problem, right? Like, what is the problem, or if there is a problem? And I know for some of you might be thinking, like, why are you starting off there? Like, the title of this series was "And Now What?" And I wanted to talk more about, hey, the solutions, like, how do we move forward? But I think we have to understand this. Like, if we are going to get to the solutions, like, we have to understand the problem, right? Like, you don't walk into a doctor's office and the doctor just hands you a prescription right off the bat as soon as you walk in. Like, he takes time to diagnose the problem so that he can properly address it. Right. And that's what we want to do here. We want to understand the totality of the problem, although we are not experts in any of this, but we want to be able to understand the problem better so that we really can come up with better solutions and better ways to move forward. Right.
Right. Yeah. And I know, obviously, as we have gone through this last week or so, it's been the issue at hand. It's kind of the elephant in the room, and a lot of talk, whether that's on social media with friends and with family. And I know, at least initially for me, I'm 52 years old, so I was born in 1968. And one of the things that as I looked at this, is this a racial issue? Is this a sin issue? And what I've indicated to individuals, I really feel like it's a little bit of both. There's, when you see individuals who, like the police officer who was kneeling on the neck of George Floyd for almost 9 minutes, and you see that dynamic, and then you see it repeatedly over and over and over again. That's a sin issue of righteousness and wickedness and evilness. But you also know that it's a racial issue as well. I mean, you think about where our country has been historically. The first blacks who are taken from the shores of Africa come here in 1619, and from 1619 all the way up to 1865, where you have the abolishment of slavery, and then in 1868 you get the first time that we are considered as blacks considered citizens. That's almost 250 years.
Yeah.
And even most sociologists will say, well, but really you could also push that out another 100 years into the late 60s, a time frame in which I was born, which you have the civil rights acts and laws that are established, but those are things that are historical and really embedded into the framework and really the fabric of our country. And so, it's a racial issue along with a sin issue. Again, from my perspective.
Yeah, for sure. Talk about your personal experience with this. And, I've been listening to a lot of, interviews on this and stuff like that. And when we talk about personal experience, I think some people get the sense of, okay, well, why do you even bring that up? Are you just giving more boo-hoo stories to this? But I think it's more than that, right? I think it does show that this is still a very relevant struggle, and this is still a very relevant problem if it's still persisting even today. So maybe share some of just your personal experience with this.
Personal experience as far as racism?
Yeah.
Or with this specific? Yeah. Well, I've been black for 52 years. So, and I'll give you a little bit about my background. I grew up in Los Angeles. My dad was born in Mississippi. He moved out here to Los Angeles when he was about 8 years old. So he was born in 43. He moved out to Los Angeles in 50, 51, somewhere in there. He grew up in when I was growing up, it was called South Central Los Angeles. Yeah. They have sanitized it now, and they just call it South Los Angeles at this point. Yeah. But he grew up in, at that time, a predominantly black neighborhood. And so I remember, the things that he would tell me about, growing up in the 50s and the 60s. He was involved in the Watts riots. I joke around. He kind of participated in the Watts riots to a certain extent.
Yeah.
But but one of the things that he would teach me and my sister about some of the things that he had to experience as a young black man, growing up, during that time. Well, fast forward. I grew up I was born in 1968. I would say I haven't experienced, absolute overt racism like you would see in the 40s or 50s or the 60s, where I had a dog sick on me, or water hoses, or seen lynchings or anything of that nature. But you experience things like being a 12-year-old kid, just on the streets of Culver City, and the police stopping a group of my friends and I because we're not in the right spot. At that time, when I was, in 1980, Culver City was mainly a white city, and being quote unquote detained just because we didn't fit the right profile, and we what are you doing? Why are you here? Those types of things. You talk about Rice University. When I went to college, I had an off-campus apartment, and around the university was a really nice area. It's called University Place. And, every once in a while I would drive through the neighborhood instead of taking main streets. I would stop multiple times because, I fit a description, or
right.
we got information that there was someone who was suspicious driving in the neighborhood.
Right.
I was driving in the neighborhood while being the color that I am.
Yeah.
And so, just things like that, over and over and over again. I remember my father and I, one time we went to the LA Convention Center. I get in a car, it was a car show. And so, they had, all these nice cars all over the floors. And so I told my dad, hey, I want to try to get into this Audi. So we sat, we waited as people were going in and out. And then I got in, and this older white lady, she was probably 60 or 70s, and I just chalk it up to ignorance, but she came up to me and she said this. Didn't know who I was, never had met me, but she said, if you keep playing that ball, maybe one day you can get this car. Wow. So the way she looked at me was, this young black man, you must be an athlete. You had no idea who I was. I mean, I could have been a lawyer or a doctor. I mean, and my father was standing right there. And so I turned to him and I said, the more things change, the more things change, the more things stay the same. And so it's those types of things that, as a black man, that you experience repetitively. And then we get to this point in time where we see something that is so unjust and so unrighteous that I'm not, co-signing, people rioting, but Martin Luther King said something years ago. He said, rioting is the language of the unheard. Rioting is the language of the unheard. And so if you experience something repetitively over and over again, eventually you're going to get to a breaking point. And I think that's where we're at as a nation, as a society.
Yeah. And in no way are we condoning or excusing looting and rioting. We're actually going to get back to that, and I want to touch back on that later. But, the point of bringing in the experience is this, like it's not an isolated thing. And it's something that is a very common thread through the black community and with black men, especially. Like we all get, two talks really. Like the first talk is, hey, life is going to be different for you, right? And I got that talk super early, right? Like
how many times did you get the talk that you're going to have to be 2 times better?
Yeah. That's the first talk. That's the first talk, right? First talk. Hey, it's going to be difficult. You're going to have to make sure you're doing everything above and beyond because the deck is stacked against you, right? But I had that talk. I think one of the first times was after a first grade or kindergarten party, and I was the only kid in my class not invited to the party. The only kid, right? And my mom, Cynthia Brown, was not having that, right? So she found out where the party was, just silly story, where the party was, took me to the same Chuck E. Cheese where the party was at, gave me a bunch of tokens and was like, hey, go crazy, right? But she pulled me aside and let me know. Yeah, that's my mom. She pulled me aside and was like, hey, this is life, and you're going to have to understand it's not right. We're not excusing it, but you have to understand, these are things that are going to happen to you because of your skin color, right? But the second talk is always the police talk, right? Got that one when I was a teenager. It was like, hey, you need to be careful. And we're going to talk more about the police because it's not saying that all policemen are bad or that we hate police, but hey, there has been a lot of conflict, right? And so my parents had to warn me, hey, you need to be very careful when you're out late at night and who you're hanging out with. And I remember being in high school, leaving a party. The party had gotten broken up by the cops. Everyone, right? And I went to predominantly white high school. Everyone's leaving.
Right.
The only person that got detained as they were getting into the car were me and my 3 other black friends, right? Weren't drinking, no suspicion, no nothing, but we were the only ones who were singled out, right? I got DWB'd just last week. And when we say DWB'd, we mean driving while black. Right. Just last week, I was pulling in, coronavirus is going on. It was my wife and my anniversary. Not a whole lot to do. So we rented a car, right? Nice cars were dirt cheap because no one was renting cars. It was like $25 for a super nice car. Not a car I'd probably be driving, right? And so when the cop pulled me over, he recognized that, right? Oh, this is a rental car. We have suspicion with people using rental cars and stuff like that. I was like, okay, come on. Right? Didn't do anything illegal. There was no real reason to stop me. So just showing this is a common thing, right?
Yeah, and again, it's historical. I mean, again, the things that we're talking about, those are things that I would say happen fairly consistently. And I'll put it this way. So, I talked about my father growing up in South Central Los Angeles. But my father went to college, got his college education. He was an accountant. He started his own firm. My mother was an educator. She had an undergraduate degree, a graduate degree. And so, and myself, I went to predominantly white private schools all my life.
Yeah, same here.
And it doesn't make a difference, your educational background oftentimes. It doesn't make a difference how you grew up, oftentimes what is happening is that individuals are looking at, you specifically as this black man, and again, historically, what we have seen is there's cause, to stop us, detain us, or whatever the case might be. I'll give you another quick story. I remember when I was at Rice, I went to, I was playing baseball at that time. It was in the spring. And we went down to Texas Tech, which is in Lubbock, Texas, West Texas, right?
Yeah.
And so me and then one of my other teammates, he was a black kid. They told us, hey, you guys go get something to eat. Just make sure you guys stay in a group. But so me and this one black kid, we went and we were going to go to like a sandwich shop. And so as we're walking up to the intersection, we stop and this car pulls up and it was a white lady. And as we're getting ready to cross the street, we hear click up. And my buddy said, did she just lock the doors on us? I mean, we're not making any move towards her. We're just crossing the street. But it's those types of things that, again, like I said, when you experience that over and over and over again, you're like, wow, am I that much of a threat? Do you see me as that much of a threat that just because of my skin color, whether it's I'm going to lock the doors, I'm going to follow you, I'm going to stop you, whatever the case might be.
Yeah.
So
we've talked about the experiential piece, and actually, guys that are watching and listening, if you have comments, if you have questions, you can write in your comments. Like, we want to try and make this as interactive as we can. The feed scrolls by fast, so if I catch your question, but we're kind of talking about something, I'll try and write it down, and maybe we can circle back to it. Or we're going to try and save time to the end. So if you're just able to wait, and you can ask some questions at the end. But we talked about the experiential piece, but let's chat about, is this a systemic issue, right? And maybe clarify, both of us can clarify a bit what we mean by systemic racism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when we talk about systemic, it's something, and I use the kind of the language of ingrained, but it's something that is happening because of the systems that have been established over time. And so again, I go back to, from a historical standpoint, when you think about blacks and slavery, I was sharing this with someone the other day as well, but that once you get to 1868 and you have 1865, I should say, you have the blacks are freed at that point, and so slavery is abolished. 1868, blacks are now considered citizens, and so now you get to the point where now blacks have an opportunity to not be enforced into labor. They're no longer having to do those types of things. But then you get the kind of Reconstruction and Jim Crow, and what happens is they take those same blacks and now they start creating these laws so that they can, in essence, enslave them again. And so they create vagrancy laws. They create laws in which you had to find a job, and if you didn't find a job, then you could be arrested because of vagrancy or breaking the labor laws that were in place. And so now what they've done is taken those individuals who were once free and then put them back into slavery, but they put them into prisons where they can also utilize them for free labor. And so that's a systemic issue, and that's something that hasn't changed. And so you look at, for example, where we're at when it comes to the criminal justice system and prison. A lot of folks are talking about prison reform, for example. That's what Colin Kaepernick was talking about. The criminal justice system and prison reform. My kids earlier, we were talking, and my son goes, "Man, Kendrick Lamar did a whole entire album about that." And so, would they be doing that? Because of it's a systemic issue. It's a issue that is happening that's extended over a period of time, and what that does is it impacts a number of different things. And so, we're talking about criminal justice and prison reform, but think about kind of the socioeconomics that that it impacts. Educationally, the healthcare system. Why is it right now we've been going through this pandemic, but who has been impacted the most? It's black and brown because of the lack of healthcare. I had a friend of mine who's in education. He teaches in a public school. His daughters go to a private school. But he goes, if my kids ever go to a public school in the area in which I live, he goes, I'm going to have them go to this one public school. And I said, well, why would you do that? Right. He said, because that school has the most resources and it has the most money. And so you think about, if you grow up in a neighborhood or an area that doesn't have the resources, doesn't have the dollars, you're going to be at a disadvantage in comparison to other individuals, other students who are in areas that have resources. They have the financial resources to really teach their students at a level where they can actually be productive as they move forward. And so those are some of the systemic things that, again, still are in place. And until we change those things and modify them and really, they're transformed, you're still going to have the same issues, as I was a kid. I told you I grew up in Los Angeles, but when I was 12, I moved to Inglewood. And I remember, my parents said, you'll never go to Inglewood High School. First and foremost, it was a gang-infested kind of high school, but they said you'll never be able to get a good education there. But other black kids that I knew who went to Inglewood, they were trying to get out of there too. And their parents were sending them to a school called Westchester, which is out near, kind of on the west side of Los Angeles, near Playa del Rey. Yeah. Or they were sending them to other private schools. Why? Because Inglewood and Morningside high schools, those were the schools where, if you sent your kids there, were they going to be able to, be there safely? Were they going to be able to get through and get an education? And I'm not saying that you can't do that at a public school. I'm not. My wife always reminds me, she went to a public high school. She went to San Bernardino High, which is out here in the Inland Empire. She goes, I came out fine, but I said, but if you look at this, again, historically, what's happening in the public schools, and by the way, my mother was a public high school teacher, and yet she sent me to private schools. So I think that just speaks volumes in regards to, again, what we're seeing, in our society and what's happening systemically, in our culture.
Yeah. I think that this is always kind of like the area where you see the most pushback and confrontation, and probably the most disagreement as well. If we're quite honest with it, there was someone would be like, well, no, like there's nothing wrong with the system. And so I want to address some of the misnomers when we say systemic racism, right? Systemic racism does not mean that the entire system is like really, really broken and there's nothing beneficial whatsoever, Like we both have benefited. Like we as black men, like, hey, we've been able to even overcome some of the challenges that are within the system, right? We've also come a long way within certain systems, right? So it's not saying that like, hey, everything is wrong. It's also not saying that, hey, there's this secret group of white people that get in this small room and they plot every year on how they can hold down the black man, right? Like that's also not what we're saying, right? And when I hear you talk, Merritt, and actually I was listening to an interview that K-Wave did. So K-Wave is a Christian radio station in Southern California, for those of you guys who don't know. And Brian Broderson, pastor from our denomination, was interviewing Dr. Tony Evans. And he said something that I loved. He said, hey, if the atmosphere is bad, right? And that's what we're saying. Hey, there's Yeah, there's some pollution in the atmosphere that if the atmosphere is bad, bad air still affects good people, right? And I thought, man,
Yeah.
that is so true, because I don't think that every white person is bad and racist and ignorant, and I don't think any of those things, right? But I think that there's some conditions here in the atmosphere that are still problematic, and everyone's still being affected by them, right?
Right. Yeah.
Um,
So
we
true.
we were talking about this, and you had mentioned talking still about systemic racism, about like things that you had kind of gone through on the employment area and your dad and stuff like that. Do you mind sharing that, Sean? I saw your question too, and I'm not going to forget that one because I think it's a good question. It's not a dumb question. I love you, Sean. Ask me.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not going to say the company, but I was working for a company at one point in time, and in this company, I worked in sales at that time, and so there wasn't very many people of color when it came to the sales force. It literally you can maybe count on two hands, how many people of color, and and I'm talking black, brown, Asian. I mean, there was very few of us. And so at a certain point in time, and this started to get to be more prevalent, I would say in the late 90s, that, you had these companies like, we want to be a more diverse company. We want to, have, better relations and engagement with people of color. And so this company I was working with, they quote unquote, stated that. And so they created this diversity council. And so it was, there was like 7 or 8 of us, male and female. I think at that point in time, the vast majority of us were black, and there might have been a Latino gentleman on the council. And so what they wanted us to do is they wanted us to go to HBCUs, the historically black colleges and universities. And so we went down to Atlanta, and we went out there a couple of times, just for meetings. And then we also were working with some individuals within, Morehouse and Spelman and Morris Brown and et cetera. And so after the second time, I would always write these reports, like, okay, this is what we did. This is, some of the outcomes. And one of the managers or executives, he gets my report and he tells my boss, he doesn't tell me, but he tells my boss, he goes, "What is Merritt trying to do? Change the company overnight?" So I said, okay. And so then later on, we have another meeting, and the company that I was working for, they had contracted out with this organization that specialized in like diversity initiatives and implementing diversity initiatives within large organizations. They were based out of Washington, D.C. It was run by a black female, and on her staff, she had, black, male and female. She had Latino. I think she had an Asian gentleman that was also on her staff.
Yeah.
And so anyway, they came out, and they were going to lead us through kind of a 2-day seminar. And so one of the first things that they told us is, be open. We want to hear from you. And the first thing in my mind was like, yeah, right. Yeah. I'm not sure I want to keep my mouth shut.
Yeah.
Well, about halfway through that first day, they went around to and at that time in my kind of immediate area, there was my boss, myself, and there was like 3 other African-American folks there. There was a white gentleman who was married to an African-American female, and there was a white female married to an Asian gentleman. So keep that in mind.
Yeah.
So we go through this 2-day seminar, and when they asked us to speak up, we spoke up. We tried to be as truthful as we could. We weren't trying to air anybody out. And so afterwards, the manager for our area wrote a report and sent it back to the corporate office. And basically that letter said that we have a couple of individuals that we might need to, do some things for, or we might need to keep, kind of keep a watch because, they have some baggage, some issues that they're potentially dealing with, that are racial and et cetera, et cetera. And so I didn't know that initially until what we found out is the secretary for the manager had actually sent that information out to the entire region. And so my phone starts to blow up. I'm getting calls from people, and I'm like, what is going on? And one of my buddies said, hey, Merritt, you got to check your email. Call me back. And so I check my email, and I see this memo that's been sent back to the corporate office. So I read it to my father, and my father's like, Merritt, you potentially got a lawsuit on your hand. He goes, what they're saying is, these individuals who are minorities potentially could be a problem for your region, for your area. And so the very next day, they flew out a vice president to kind of test the temperature of all those folks. Myself, my manager, the white gentleman married to the African American lady, and the white lady married to the Asian man. And it's just like stuff like that just happens over and over again. And it's like, I mean, just because of who I am and my color of my skin, is that the stuff that I have to deal with?
Yeah.
There's so many other things that we have to deal with that are bigger.
Yeah.
And so it's that type of stuff. And one last quick thing. I talked about my father. So my father, once he graduated with a degree in accounting. He went to work for a company called Kenneth Leventhal. Kenneth Leventhal was at that point one of the largest accounting firms in the country. He was based out of Citrus City, and so there was a lot of good there. The reason he got there was because of an affirmative action program that accounting firm instituted. And so he got a lot of great experience. Probably if he had been, coming out of college 5-10 years earlier, he probably wouldn't have had that experience, but he got that experience. But my mother told me one thing. She goes, the reason your father left was not because he didn't like it, not because, he didn't get a great experience. It's because he could never be a partner there. So that firm was a Jewish firm. It was run, the gentleman who ran and started the firm was Jewish. But all the folks who were in partner positions were Jewish. And so my father was African American, so he would never ever get a chance to get to that level.
Yeah.
So he left so he could start his own company. And so, those are the things, again, we've come a long way, but there's still a long ways to go.
Yeah. I want to take a question. So Sean, a friend of mine, Sean Hasman, he asked, are the forms that we fill, and I haven't ever really given much thought to this, but the forms that we fill out, birth certificates, driver's license, like a lot of the forms we fill out that have the check mark boxes for race, like, are they contributing to the issue? Should we... I've never thought like what that data is really being used for, but yeah, I mean, it's so natural that we just see those things on forms.
Yeah. So I'll speak about that kind of in my current context. So again, I'm in higher ed, and so we have a ton of forms, that students have to sign, and so. There's applications, there's financial aid forms, and et cetera. And so some of those forms aren't really necessarily, the information that we're asking. We're collecting it, but some of that information is information that we need to get back to others, so the federal government or organizations who would like to, collect and gather that information. So they can identify, okay, what's the student population look like at CBU, at your institution? What's the breakdown when it comes to ethnicity, amongst white, black, Latino, Asian, Island Pacific, those types of things.
Yeah.
And so, again, I don't know, I don't know all of the details, for other individuals. I don't know, what they're gathering that information from. Is it contributing to the problem? Maybe, potentially. I haven't thought about it, and that's the first time I've ever received that question. So I'm not sure I really have a definitive answer for you.
Yeah.
But I do know, again, that information is being gathered and collected for a myriad of different reasons. So
I used to like mark random things on those forms because I thought it was funny. Like I'd always put like Pacific Islander or things like that. And you're just like, oh, why not? It's not like you're gonna be checking my ID to see what it is. So I was probably throwing off the system, Sean. I don't know.
Yeah.
Good. Talk with me, Rick. I see your question. My brother-in-law, Rick. Thank you so much for your question. We'll definitely get to that one.
Hey, what's up, Rick?
Still talking about what systemic racism isn't. I want to go back to that one. You hear a lot of people talk about, okay, is it systemic racism or is it just personal responsibility? And I think this again is one of those areas where I would say it's both, right? Can you maybe speak into that too?
Yeah. Again, I wouldn't say it's either or. I think it's there's both there. Again, I shared this this quote also. I was talking to somebody, and they said, "Man, 100 years of racism, or a way people have operated, that is very hard to change. It's it's kind of like the ship that sails out, and it just doesn't make an about turn to come back. I mean, it's a long, slow turn, and so it's hard to change years and years and years of history. And so again, you have that going along with the country that we live in, unfortunately. And I agree with you, Marlon. If you look at the 1800s, or when Frederick, I mentioned that I had recently read Frederick Douglass' autobiography. You think about when Frederick Douglass was growing up and alive. It's such a different time than right now, right? So things have gotten better, but there are still things that have happened historically that still have an impact today.
Yeah.
And so, that's the, kind of the systemic piece of it. But then you also have to realize that, each and every one of us, we are accountable and we're responsible for, our actions, our thoughts, our deeds, the things that we say.
Exactly.
Each and every one of us, have to take responsibility for that. And so, I don't know if again, I was talking to my son and daughter earlier, but, there was something that was stated by Drew Brees, who plays for the New Orleans Saints. And I guess Drew Brees, he's had family members who are serving, who served. And I think a lot of us have had individuals who, have family members who have served our country. And so we think back when Colin Kaepernick first started, came out and he was kneeling. Well, Drew Brees was one of the individuals who says, "Hey, I don't agree with that. I don't want to, have anything that, is negative or stated negative or portrays our, the flag as negative, that, goes against our service men and women." And if you listen to what Colin Kaepernick had stated, he always stated, "That is not what I'm on. I'm not talking about, servicemen. I support them. I appreciate what the men and women who have served this country have done. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about, denouncing the flag. What I'm talking about is, what we see in our criminal justice system, what we see, when it comes to, the things that need to be done when it comes to prison reform. That's what I'm on. That's what I'm talking about."
Yeah.
Well, Drew Brees came out and said, when Colin Kaepernick was talking about this, I don't agree with that. And then today, or yesterday, I'm not sure exactly when, but then he gets on an interview, and as we're going through this, he once again restates what he said about individuals who are protesting our flag, protesting our servicemen and women, and it's like, dude, are you not listening to what is being said? And so I think it's those individuals need to make sure that they are responsible and accountable for what they're saying and the thoughts, the things that come out of their mouths. And so, each and every one of us, has to take that into consideration. Okay, what am I doing? How am I, making a difference? What things am I doing to kind of change or transform the culture and the society that we live in? How am I making a difference versus just staying status quo or changing the narrative?
Yeah.
And I think that's what what we've often seen as people have said. These are some of the issues that our country is facing. What happens quite often is the narrative gets changed instead of actually sticking to the topic at hand.
Yeah.
So I think, again, I think it's not either or. I think it's both of those things.
I think, and kind of when I was phrasing that question, yes, responsibility for the individual that may have racist tendencies or maybe saying things that aren't helpful. But I'm even thinking about like the Black community, right? Where it's always in this juxtaposition of, hey, all our problems are because of systemic racism. It's the white man. It's the white man. You're holding me back. I can't do anything. As opposed to, okay, there's still like, I was, hopefully you might be watching her, but I've had friends, right? I'll put it that way, who even with the whole coronavirus thing, right? You get the stimulus check, and it's like, hey, that's not for you to just go spend it however you want. Like, invest that wisely. And yet I see the Facebook post and it's like Air Jordans, Nikes. It's like, hey, come on, man. Like, you can't then go back and blame the government and say it's all your fault if this is what you did with the money, right? Like, that's not right either, right? So we're saying, hey, there is absolutely, there are things that are undeniably like system issues, right? I think it's also important to say, like, because I think some people will hear that and it's like, well, no, slavery's done with, civil rights movement has fixed a lot of things, so like I don't see systems in place, right? And I totally agree. Like, it's a lot more subtle and not as in your face as years previously, but doesn't mean it's gone away with, right?
Right. And again, those are things that they still have. They are still impacting folks today, even though they might have been hundreds of years ago. But those are things that are still, have ramifications. The things that you might have done 10, 15 years ago, they could still have ramifications right now at this current time. But I mean, to kind of follow up your point when it comes to responsibility, again, we all know, that, there are things that are happening where, biases, based on skin color, that still happens. Racism is, still happens. Things that, that are initiated because of race still happen. But I agree with you also to the extent that as an African American male, I still also have a responsibility to, I can change, some of the things that are occurring, within my life.
Right.
And so, and I think we talked about this. I shared a story. This young man, African American young man, he's in his, I don't know, early 20s, mid 20s, and so I was trying to help him. He was interviewing with our institution, and so I was trying to help him I was pulling for him to get a job with us, okay? And so he was interviewing for a position, and in that position, the final three candidates were African-American female, a Latina female, and him. As we were going through the process, it was clear that the African-American female was the best candidate. That's who we wanted to go with. She was fantastic, smart, intellectual, she had experience in the position that we were looking for. And we would have went with her. We actually offered her the position, but she came back and countered our offer, and she just wanted a lot more money than we had available. She would have been the highest paid person in that department, and overshadowing others who had been in that job. So it just wasn't feasible for us to do that. And so she declined, and so we went with our second candidate, which is the Latina female. Okay. So this gentleman, I called him personally. I said, hey, unfortunately, we went with another candidate. Maybe at a later point, maybe something else comes up. Well, I went to my my vice president and said, hey, what do you think if we looked at him for another position? And so we brought him back in, we interviewed him, and then we sent him over to his final interview. And in his final interview, it was a disaster. And so my vice president came back and she goes, well, it didn't go that well. We're not going to move forward with him. And so I said, well, tell me what happened. So she told me what happened. So I went back to him and I said, hey, unfortunately, here's what happened in the interview. I'm not sure if you feel differently about it, but this is what was stated. I said, at this point, here's what I would suggest you do. Refine your interview skills so that next time when you get the next opportunity, you will be prepared and ready for that final interview. So we left it at that. He called me back a couple of days later, and he says, well, you were going to move forward with me, but you let the white man do this and the white man do that, and this is the reason why. And, in essence, I was cooning for the white man. And I said, wait, that's not what I'm saying. I said, first and foremost, we wouldn't have moved you forward if we didn't think you had the ability. But I said, but part of it is you have to take responsibility. You need to be prepared. And so I think when black people are talking about the white man and the white man, hey, I get it. We understand the historical things. We understand the systemic things. But I, as an individual, also need to take responsibility for my actions as well. I need to make sure that, if I'm looking at it from an educational standpoint, or an employment standpoint, that, I'm prepared as best as I can for the opportunity. And when someone is trying to help you and assist you through that opportunity, not being arrogant and having a lack of humility, but saying, okay, let me listen so that I can be prepared for the next go around. One last thing, there's this gentleman, I listen to him every once in a while. Don't agree with everything that he states, but there are some things that I do agree with. His name is Dr. Umar Johnson, and he's a psychologist by trade. But right now, he is trying to build a school for young black boys. That's his goal. I want to build a school for young black boys. I believe out in D.C. or in Maryland. And one of the things he says is, you know what? It would be great if I could have, the Jay-Z's and the Oprahs and all these people come alongside me. And it would be great if I could get government funding. But he goes, you know what? At the end of the day, I'm going to build this so that I can have an impact and help the folks that I really, truly believe need help. And so he's not falling back on, well, it's their fault, or it's their issue, or they're the cause, or they're keeping me from getting to my ultimate goal. What he's saying is, hey, if I can get people to come alongside me, that's great. But if not, I'm going to take responsibility and I'm going to be accountable and I'm going to do the very best that I can so that I can put myself in a situation to be of assistance to others. And so I think that's, those are some of the things that, again, as people of color, we also need to take, responsibility for.
Yeah. Hey guys, we're coming up on the hour, so I want to wrap it up fairly soon. This is Instagram Live, so millennials' attention spans ended about 30 minutes ago. But any questions that are still out there? There was, two that I've written down. One that I want to throw at you to Merrit. I've heard a lot of people say, hey, speaking out, making a big issue is causing more division, right? Like you're just adding fuel to the fire by continuing with your posts and continuing to speak out. Like, not talking about the looting and rioting. Like we've already said that's already bad, but hey, speaking out, like that's also like a big issue. And even those, maybe I should tag it together, because I think there's confusion often between the looting and the rioting and the protesting, right? The narrative has been predominantly about the looting and rioting, how bad that is. Clearly saying looting and rioting is bad, right? But the protesting, hey, when I hear people say, hey, that's causing more division, you just need to be, is that always done in love? You need to be more loving. Maybe you shouldn't be doing this because it's adding more fuel to the fire. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, so kind of the protesting versus the rioting. I think it's a form of kind of hijacking the narrative. I mean, that's the protest, and again, let me back up and say this. I am not suggesting that people should go out and riot. Again, I used a quote from Martin Luther King: "Rioting is the language of the unheard." But if you go back and look at Martin Luther King, and from a historical standpoint, you can see what his nonviolent protest, the impact that it had. So I'm not saying that. I'm not encouraging anybody to go out and riot, but I don't have an issue with the protest and speaking out, because here's the thing: if we continue to sit silent, there's not going to be any change that happens or occurs at all. Yeah. We need people to speak up, and when we talk about justice, that word comes from judgment. And when we talk about, from a biblical standpoint, when you're talking about judgment, what you're talking about is, declaring right from wrong. This is wrong, this is right or righteous. This is just, this is injustice. And so we need to be able to speak out and say that. I mean, you're a parent, I'm a parent, and there are probably many parents out there. If your child does something, you are not going to just sit there and allow them to continue to go forth and do what is wrong. You're going to point it out and say, wait a second, you need to stop. That's not right.
Yeah.
So you're going to point it out, and if they continue to do it, you're going to be a little bit more forceful, and you're going to say, stop.
Yeah, that's good.
That is not right. And so I think what we're seeing is that people have finally got to the point, and they've said, enough is enough.
Yeah.
We've seen this. Floyd, Aubrey, the young man in Georgia, both Jean, the man who was shot eating ice cream in his apartment. Yeah. Tatiana Jefferson, who the police just shoot in her house. I mean, after a while, people have said that enough is enough. Yeah. This has got to stop, and it's got to change. And so we need, people to stand up. We need Christians to stand up. We need our white, brother and sisters to stand up and say, alongside with us, just as many whites marched with MLK, and they said, enough is enough. Yeah. This has got to stop. This has got to change.
Yeah. I think it's kind of ironic because, again, I've seen a few people post about that, like, hey, you're just adding more fuel to the fire by speaking up. But then you think, again, you reference Martin Luther King Jr. a lot, right? And like that's exactly what people were saying about him in that time. He's a rebel rouser. He's causing division, and like, oh, not sure what happened.